It was at this moment that he knew.
He bucked up. Welcome. You're listening to Bucked Up with Sam Buck.
Fucked up. Now you fucked up. Now you fucked up. Now you fucked up. Now you have fucked up.
Man, thank you so much for coming on. It was cool. Before we joined in, I was reading some of your blog, and it was very similar to my writing. You're like about the in your intro, it said something about routine, being free within routine, and that's something that I write a ton about myself. So it was cool. It was like, oh shit, I related a lot to your writing.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, thank you for checking it out.
Of course. Welcome to the Bucked Up podcast, Pat. Is it Pecue? How do you pronounce your Pecue?
Oh, it's Pecue. So it's my initials spelled out.
Okay, Pat Pecue Quinn. Yes. Amazing artist, man. I'm a real big fan of your art, so I'm honored to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm a fan of the podcast.
Thank you very much. So I guess we'll get into it. When did you do a lot of like rap covers? You grew up listening to rap and stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah.
What styles?
So I kind of came up on late 80s and then into the 90s hip hop. I grew up in West Philly. So like we were still in the in the shadow of New York, but there was a lot of stuff locally. So, there were the roots, but then there was also some more old school, like Schoolie D, 3 Times Dope, things like that. And then during like the late 90s, like independent hip hop scene, we had pretty big, community there. There were a few central places. So like Jedi Mind Tricks came out of that.
Great artist.
And then you have obviously the bigger ones like the Roots, Outer Space, Reef the Lost Cause came out of that. A lot of the guys that I guess were part of like the Army of the Pharaohs movement. But then we also had like more, I guess, that was like real centered on the street. So you had like Major Figures and State Property and stuff like that, and it was all kind of equally celebrated in Philly. But my stuff that I came up with as like an early teenager was, the same as everybody else. Wu-Tang, A Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, Mobb Deep, all of that.
Were you making music at this time? I was listening to your instrumental album. Were you just doing, you said graffiti and art, stuff like that?
Yeah, I didn't start actually making music until about 2005. When I was coming up, I really didn't have any musical talent. I wasn't really a participant in like the hip hop culture, except for like going to shows and buying stuff, buying the clothes. And once I got into graffiti, that was kind of like my first entry point as like sort of being a participant in it. But I was only active as a graffiti writer for about 3 years.
Okay.
And then I got out of it, but it's still kind of like the foundation for everything I do still.
So I don't really, I notice it in your style, but I don't know about graffiti. So what made you get out of it? Because you speak of it. It's funny how people who were graffiti artists speak of it, not like another art form. It's more of like, I don't know, like a dangerous part in their past. And of course it is, but it's talked about differently.
Yeah. It's definitely its own thing. There's a lot of writers that are like active writers, but there's so many elements to the graffiti culture that like, let's say like the big colorful murals and pieces and stuff that you may see in pictures, that's only one element. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of like the smallest element, especially in Philly. In Philly, like the biggest central point are the tags and what, if you don't know, it's called the throw up. So it's like sort of like the quick bubble letter pieces that are only like 1 or 2 colors. That takes precedence in Philly.
Is it because of the more dangerous spot you can get it, or the more public spot? Like, what is it about the tag, like throwing it up, that's the most important?
I think because of that, I think because you can touch more spots. Like depending on how big or involved one of the, colorful pieces are, it could take, some of those things take, 6 hours to do.
Mhm.
And when you're doing that in a public place, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's a lot involved in that. There's a lot of anxiety where some guys will just, they'll take, a bunch of cans, and they will, like, they call it like going on route. So they will walk like a bus route,
Mhm.
and then they will tag everything along that bus route, um, so that people that are riding that bus route see their name. And some guys, that's kind of the organization of how they kind of do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They'll take a particular train line or bus route. But that's what I did. I got out of it, to answer your question. I'm getting kind of long-winded. Um, I started when I was probably about 16, and then right around the time, like just before and just after turning 18, I got caught a bunch of times that were close to each other. And it was just like, I love doing this. It's fun to have like the little adventures with my friends to go out and do it. And I
Yeah.
still am like tapped into the culture in terms of like keeping up on like who's, on top and who's, really active. But I don't really want to spend too much, you know what I mean? I don't want to risk that.
Yeah.
I'm more of like a homebody. I don't really want to, I'm not interested in doing any jail time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no. Was there any like times that you got? Was there like a last time when you were like, this could have been bad?
No.
That's good that you got out before. And you get those senses.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And I had some friends that were getting caught. Um, and I had some friends that, you know, I guess a couple of the guys that I was coming up with were definitely elevating the craft and became really, really influential and kind of like kings of Philly. And I knew that like the amount of work that goes into doing that, you could like start a business. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot more things that you could do, but I love that they did that. And they, some of those guys turned it into like very promising art careers. But it takes a lot of time, dedication, and balls to be able to do that day in and day
Yeah.
out. And
I
I
mean, you
wasn't.
turned it into an art career now. I mean, it wasn't right away, but you're doing that now.
Kind of. It's, I guess I kind of like toe a line on that because I haven't been active for so long.
Mhm.
And I don't really like to, I don't really like to claim being part of it because there's so many guys that are so much more dedicated and into that. And I would never want to, I mean, I have so much like respect for what they do that
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to claim being part of that because I'm technically not. It just,
Right.
it influences a lot of the stuff, like how you say my routine and things like that. There's a lot of that, how I kind of organize my thoughts around like art and hip hop culture and like just how, like even like the marketing of an album, how I do album covers, a lot of it is still based on like stuff I picked up from graffiti. So I give like the ultimate praise and respect to it,
When
but
did
I don't
you
want to claim it.
Were you artistic growing up, like before 16? How did you get into graffiti?
It was just the thing that people did. I I kind of like, I guess around like 13 or 14, I was real into sports and I was like artistic, but not to the, I was the dude that drew the Wu-Tang logo on all my friends' backpacks in like seventh
Mhm.
grade. You know what I mean? It was like that type of thing. But I never really like, I never like painted pictures or anything like that.
Yeah.
And then I hit a point around like 13 or 14 when I started getting into like skateboarding and just kind of like dipping away from like just like traditional kid sports culture. I was a pretty sheltered kid when I was like in grade school. And then
Mhm.
when I started like getting around some of my friends, like some, like a couple guys were into like going out and tagging, some guys were into skateboarding. And then we all kind of connected. And then like those guys are still my best friends now. But a
Are
big
they
part of
still
it,
creating art? Are they still?
they're all of them are very musically talented, but they're not they're not doing artwork like I am. No.
Yeah. Well, then, were you doing art throughout that time, 18 to whenever? When did you start back doing it seriously?
So it hit like a few different steps. So I stopped being active doing graffiti on walls when I was 18, but I was still doing it in books, and I still loved the process of like drawing and all that stuff.
Mhm.
But I would just like grab a sketchbook here and there, and I would always kind of go in and do stuff. And then then like a few years later, I got into doing music. And then when like stuff like MySpace came around, I started like messing around with just doing my own logos and stuff to put on like the MySpace page to promote the music. And then I got a lot of like good feedback on the logos. So then fast forward around like 2008, 2009, like a lot of, like the recession hit, and I got laid off from my job, and I didn't know what I was going to do. So I went back to school for graphic design. I had been messing with it a little bit. And a big thing in like graphic design is like you think that you're just like piecing some stuff together with like some computer software, but people actually encourage you to do a lot of sketching and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So through the process of getting in and like keeping a sketchbook all the time, I kind of got back into drawing a little bit. And then I started getting a little bit tapped into like the art world, just paying attention to artists and stuff. A lot of guys that were like came up and were into like graffiti, or like were doing art on skateboards and stuff like that. And I started to pay attention to who those guys were and how they functioned. And I became a fan of them. You know what I mean? Like a lot of that early it's very similar to now. Like a lot of the early independent hip hop guys were just doing covers, and now they are doing ads for, you know what I mean, like bigger companies. So I started to get into that a little bit more, and that got me to start, really like practicing just like doing my own kind of art and different styles. And
But
then
you must have wanted to go back. How old were you when you went back to school for graphic design?
I was 28.
So that there must have been like I know losing your job, but there must have been like a voice in the back of your head telling you always wanted to do it.
I think so. I mean, when I was, I really wanted to go to college for graphic design when I was in high school, but I think I was doing that sort of as like a catalyst to like learn concepts that would like improve the graffiti stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then I kind of always did like have conversations with friends like, oh, we can make t-shirts, and you know what I mean? Because during a lot of that indie hip hop boom of like 97, 98, you also saw the beginnings of a lot of these like streetwear brands kind of coming to the forefront. Like Supreme had been around for a while. It's obviously what it is now, but Supreme started out as just like a skate shop. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And then it just kind of grew culturally. So I love, there was like this renaissance of like all of these like independent, it wasn't exactly skateboard brands, it wasn't exactly, like hip hop brands like Echo. It was these smaller little things, and I really, really liked how they kind of like tapped into different aspects of culture.
That's such a funny thing to hear because I didn't really know the history of all that, but it is what's happening now. I mean, it's like Griselda is kind of taking that and kind of reinvent, even not just with the sound, but with the way they're doing it too. I mean, I was just in Buffalo for the Buffalo Kids Gallery opening, and it was insane to see the amount of people there. And it's crazy that they're kind of like, what's that going to be in 10, 15 years? Is it going to be
Yeah,
like a Supreme? Is it going to?
I think about that a lot, because what, and I've heard how you kind of speak to some of the other guys about this, like what those guys created. It's almost like there was so much stuff that was already there that was like what they did. They just managed to put like a frame around it or something. You know what I mean? Like that whole thing had been bubbling for so long, and then And you got to give the credit to West more than anybody else. I mean, you know, like you see these videos that go up of like Conway, you know, rhyming in like 2009, and he was incredible back then.
Yeah.
But West kind of like I said, just kind of put that frame around it and curated it all into this movement that I think it just kind of, I don't know, you know, there were guys like Rock Marciano and Action Bronson that were kind of doing what they were, but whatever it was that they did, they just built that community. And it was like, it actually feels like some real like hardcore punk stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, like the consciousness of it.
Do you remember what the first Griselda project you heard was?
I think I was just hearing random songs.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were on it had to have been Fly God.
Yeah.
Like as far as like a project. And you know, like Fly God is that thing, you know what I mean? It's like that like it's like the imagery of it, what Sepp did for them, and
yeah.
like
Shout out Seppington, great artist.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out Sepp. Yeah, great dude. But I think that they like, you know, like that Fly God cover is the equivalent of like the Wu-Tang symbol or like the Black Flag logo, whatever it is for this culture. That's like sort of, you know, the symbol that represents all this renaissance that's going on right now.
Yeah, and it is funny. I guess this is the first time I've said it on, not that it mattered, but like I first heard Conway with Reject 2, and I didn't get like the first, I would say 5 times I heard West Side, I didn't like get it yet. Like my brain hadn't like formed the synapse to be like, oh, this is a completely new thing. But then when I started really like, I like not forced myself to listen to him, but this was even before, this was right before Fly God. It clicked where it's like, oh, this is a new thing. He found, as you said, he took what was already bubbling and just created something different and new with it.
Yeah. And you know, it's funny that you're saying that, like how it didn't click at first, because the thing is, like a lot of guys that are my age, like my friends that aren't tapped into music the way that I am, I'm sort of like the artery that like will send stuff out. Like, I think you'll like this. A lot of these guys are, you know what I mean? They're just trying to, normal, like married kids, just trying to go into work and everything. And when I tried to put them all on, I was already tapped in. But you know, guys that came up on like 90s hip hop, the beats are a lot slower. It's a lot of like, it's just weird. Like say somebody that was like a huge fan of like a Tribe Called Quest or like De La Soul or something like that, if you put them on the Griselda, like the music you can argue is even darker than like the Wu-Tang stuff, because it's, you know what I mean? Like, and West has said before, he's like, my content isn't really that much different than like, you know, some trap rapper or something like that. It's just that, you know, that's the sonic palette that they put it on. When everybody abandoned the East Coast sound, they actually leaned even further into it with Derringer's beats.
Yeah.
And you can tell that West was just exposed and like was put on to a lot more stuff. Like he references a lot of like, you know, nonfiction and a lot of that independent hip hop, or even like the Dilla and Madlib stuff. And you know, those beats are like undeniably crazy.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of like gives the segue to be able to do that more street centered rap over, you know, like a sonic palette that's even so much more left to center than what everybody else is used to, and that's what makes it special.
Yeah, and he has such a love for other things other than well, like I don't even like wrestling, but I've enjoyed wrestling just being a fan of West Side. Like I got into it, and having, it's like this podcast. Honestly, like I could, if my first couple episodes were like talking to comedians in the local scene, and it was a great conversation, but I didn't bring my other passions into it. Like getting to talk to you, like it's cool because I know you have a love for something that I also have a love for, and we're coming at it in different ways. Like I have this podcast to kind of offer the universe, and you have your art to kind of offer the universe, but it's through a love of something that is just there. It's through a love of music and a love. You said you were sheltered growing up. How did you find rap? Like,
I mean, I was into rap, from the get-go. Like the neighborhood that I was in was surrounded by basically like the pioneering rap groups or rappers in Philly
Yeah.
sort of came out of West Philly, and they were in the neighborhoods that were just adjacent to mine. um I'm saying in the sense of like I was just more into like what normal kids were just into. Like I played sports, I
Mhm.
listened to rap music, I watched Adam Sandler movies. You know what I mean? It was just
Yeah.
all like the stuff I was into wasn't so much different than what maybe some kids from like the suburbs were in. But then I wasn't sheltered in the sense that um like I knew what was going on, and there was a
Mhm.
lot of stuff going on in my neighborhood. But I was raised pretty well and just I didn't like spend time out on the street as much until I was like 13 or 14.
Yeah. Well, I feel like Philly is, I don't want to spit, but it is a more like artistic rap scene. Like the rap out of Philly is different than just in, a couple hours each way from different cities, It's,
Yeah, yeah, it is. And it's like, Schoolie D literally created gangster rap
mhm.
in, the 80s. And then you had like Three Times Dope, Cool C, Steady B. But then you had on the same side, you had like Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, which was like a little bit more, it was cleaner and but these things kind of function together. And then my neighborhood in West Philly is called Overbrook. So you have these areas where the this all this hip hop was created, but then on the other side is Lower Merion, which is actually like a pretty wealthy section of Pennsylvania where Kobe Bryant is from. So
Okay.
it's like it bumps up against all of these different surroundings, and then it has its own thing going on. So
Yeah. I guess that's true because if you look at like Buffalo, I just had on Jay Skis who signed to drum work, and like
mhm.
Conway, I mean, with Love the Genius, and like he put on a different style than what I thought he would sign to his
Yeah,
label. Like those two
yeah,
artists are both amazing, but very different than what I thought drum work would be.
yeah. Both of them both sound like, like it's really cool that they came up and they're part of drum work, but they could easily be part of like TDE or like, you know what I mean, some more like bohemian style hip
Yeah,
hop in a
I
way
just
that,
talked to Jay, and he was saying that he like Lupe was one of his biggest
yeah.
inspirations, and him and Love actually came up together before
Oh,
they
cool.
so they knew each other before Conway, which I thought was it was a cool that they said they were making music in like 2013 together.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's really cool.
Well, then when did you get back into making like album, like what was your first album cover or piece for an artist or a rap artist, or like when did that come around?
So once people started to notice that I was drawing a lot more and not just like putting covers together on like Photoshop and stuff, um, uh, I was I was just kind of like putting out artwork on Instagram, and then um, I caught the eye of some local Philly guys, and then I'm gonna say it was like right about this time last year. Once everybody started to go into quarantine, I had the mindset of a lot of people are going to start to get like lazy and complacent, especially in this first 2 months, because they're not going to know how to adapt to it. I had no idea that we'd be in the situation we are now where we're still kind of quarantined, but I just knew that that was going to be a thing. So I basically just, when I wasn't working my day job, all I did was just make stuff and keep putting it out there. And I was doing I was putting out a beat tape uh, for um, for March, which is Air Max month. And
Mhm.
I did a beat tape that was kind of like centered around the creation of the Nike Air Max. And in doing that, I was going to create some art based on like colorways of some of like the most classic like Nike Air Max releases. So I reached out to Screw Tape, who is a Philly MC, and because I know that he's a big Air Max head, And I was just like trying to pull in. I didn't want to just do my favorites. I wanted to pull in other people's favorites. So I sent some stuff to him. Him and I had shown some interest in working together. I wasn't pitching to work with him. I was just pitching to, get his input on a couple of his favorite sneakers. And I was going to draw art based on it, put it on Instagram, and use it to promote my tape. He saw the first thing I did and he liked it so much that he said, is there any way that I'd be able to use this? I have an EP coming out. I said, yeah, no problem. So then him and I got to talking and I started to hear some of the music he was making. And I kind of just abandoned this beat tape I was doing, or that I had done, but I abandoned promoting. I said, I'm going to art direct this project if you let me. So him and I started exchanging ideas and we created all this stuff that ended up becoming the Soul Provider EP, which is at the end of May is going to be celebrating its 1-year anniversary. But it became something that like resonated with a lot of people in our scene. And that exposed me to some new stuff. So I got to do like, all the art, but then also like the full rollout for the project with them. And it was just, Screw and me just exchanging ideas. Once that got me in front of some more people, the first person to reach out to work was Rashid Chappelle. And he let me know, he said, I'm going to be putting out an album in a few months with Buck Wild.
Great rapper, great producer. That's a great duo right there.
Yeah. So that was really cool. And Rashid was the first person to reach out. So then talked to him and Buck on the phone. We kind of like laid down the concept, figured everything else out. And I started to put that together. All the while, Screw Tape had a follow-up project that was coming out a few months later. So while I was doing the stuff for Rashid and Buck, I handed that in, did Screw Tape's next project. And then on top of that, I had become during that time friendly with both Sep and Squat Deadface. And so I've been speaking to them a little bit. And just as a tribute to Sep, I created my spin on his Conway Reject face,
which is one of my favorite of your pieces. I love that.
Oh, thank you,
one.
man. Thank you, man.
That's a really amazing one. Yeah.
And I put that up, and then people started to gravitate toward it. And then I liked the response so much. I think the day that I put it up was the day that West posted the picture that was going to become Fly God is an Awesome God too. So I was like, all right, fuck it. I'm gonna flip this too. Yeah. So I did my spin on that. And during that time, I put that up, I posted it and went to sleep. And then I woke up at like 3:00 in the morning and Squat Deadface had sent me a DM and he just wrote the West effect. I was like, what the hell is he talking about? And then I looked and I saw that West had shared it. And in the span of like a couple hours, all my followers went up. I was fairly unknown at that point. And then everything has kind of snowballed from there. But I just liked that project so much because I had become a fan of Rome Streets and I liked that West was giving him some recognition on it. So I did another follow-up thing based on one of Rome's lines on the album, and I illustrated that line. Rome liked it and shared it. And
which line? Because I think that's probably one of the most underrated West projects.
Let me pull it up. It's he says the streets will take you but won't bring you back. That's what my mama said, or something like that.
Yeah. That's such a good that whole tape is probably my most listened to of the last year out of all of Wes's projects. And it really gets overlooked compared to Pray for Paris and compared to Who Made the Sunshine, who I also love, which I also loved, but I love Fly God is an Awesome God.
I love all three. Yeah. It definitely had like kind of like a raw mixtape feel. It could have just been like another extension of the Hitler Wears Herman series.
Yeah. Well, what do you think it is about the Wes effect? Like there's an art, like the love for art is much more prevalent there than in other rap subgenres.
I don't know what it is exactly. I think that people like to have sort of like a North Star of what the culture is, and people really put that on him. And he's, he's done a lot for these artists in our space. What Sep helped those guys build, and then what he did for Squat by sharing his stuff and giving him the album cover. But then there's a bunch of others, you know what I mean? There's my friend Lord MF,
Great artist.
Tony Caves, who's done some stuff with them. And I
Even
think
shout out Kip. Even shout out Kip.
Absolutely. Kip's my man. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So putting all that stuff out there, I think that there's like this, I think a big part of it is that just the fact that there were great artists the whole time. West made it cool along with Sep. You got to include Sep right in there with it. Sep created something for him that became iconic, but I think was sort of undeniable at the time. You know what I mean? Both the Fly God and the Don't Get Scared Now covers are just, they resonate as soon as you see them. And I think when that happens, I think it encourages other people to make good art and not just have, because now that we exist in a way that you have physical copies are a thing again. And because people buy the vinyl, you're not looking at a 1-inch icon on your phone anymore. We're not just looking at that. You can get, there's this cycle of the artwork gets released, and then, people buy the vinyl when it drops. And then a couple weeks later, the vinyl shows up. And, when you're holding that, 12-inch by 12-inch vinyl in your hand, as opposed to looking at something even on Instagram, it's just a different experience. So it makes the art a driver of the music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think the two go hand in hand, and it encourages better artists to get involved. And that's kind of what's happening.
It is true, because I like, you were saying that you're the artery to your friends of music, and I am that to my friends, but I judge music off the album cover. I really do. Like, if you have a cool album cover, as you said, like Sep creating that with Wes, like the album cover is a big part of it, and it was lost for a long time.
Yeah.
And it is back, and that's what I really liked. I loved you, Wise P, son of a. Like, I knew that was you immediately. Like, you have a very unique style of art, and I knew that was you immediately. So that was really cool when I was getting him on, and I had been talking to you, that that you got recognition in that too, because that's a whole different subgenre of music also.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for bringing that up on the interview, because that was really cool to hear that.
Oh yeah, of course. No, that was a great. How did you get in contact with him?
His manager Re-Rock had hit me up.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what he saw or what, but at that point, this was probably around like August, September, maybe. And a lot of my work had been getting out there a little bit more. A lot of the guys that are pretty influential in the culture have been sharing it. Just if I did some stuff for them, and then it just kind of went from there. I can't remember exactly what Re-Rock had seen that.
Yeah.
But
were you able? Oh, sorry. What were you saying?
I was just going to say, he told me the theme of the album and let me hear some rough cuts, and then just let me go from there. So,
well, were you able to sell prints or get any of this before the West shared your stuff? You said that made you more. Was that when that happened, were you like, oh shit, this is more serious than I thought it was going to be?
I knew I was going to get there at one point. I had sold some prints on my site, but none of it was really based directly to music. It was obviously influenced by it, but it wasn't like I was drawing, RZA's face or something like that. I wasn't doing anything like that. It was once I did the Conway Reject, and somebody had asked me if I was going to do prints of it, and I said I didn't feel comfortable doing it because I was just doing that to pay tribute to what Seppington had created.
Mhm.
And then Seppington encouraged me to do the Prince. So once I did that, and then 2 days later, the West thing, I was like, oh, that would be kind of cool for like my first go around at trying to do this, that I do these two together.
Yeah.
And then that, they did what they did. And that allowed me to, keep doing it. So the prints aren't like my main focus in terms of like, they're not making up the bulk of what I do. I want to get into doing them a little bit more, but I want to make some other things as well. You know what I mean? Like, we sell these prints and everything, but people only have so much space on their walls.
Yeah.
So I want to get into trying to see what else we can tap into that like adds some value to this culture, but is still like a display of like really creative stuff. I saw how people did that with streetwear and the community that surrounded that. So I think that there's a lot of possibilities there.
Well, you said that do you ever think about not doing graffiti again, but like doing a mural, like doing big piece and going out and kind of doing that again?
That's kind of the next thing that I want to start to do. A lot of my work during the quarantine has been digital. But I came up doing, whatever, not digital work, like just like doing like paint on a canvas. And I want to get into that a little bit more, but it takes a little bit longer time. The demand has been there for the last like 6 months for a lot of album covers and a lot of commissions and stuff like that. So it just fits with my time. I don't want to have, if somebody reaches out to me for something, I don't want to have them waiting too long. And I don't want to miss out on opportunities because it's going to take me too long. So I want to find that reasonable midpoint where I can, turn something around in a reasonable time, but still have it be, good and a lot of detail involved. And if I was doing these, just by painting canvases, then that wouldn't be feasible. But that's kind of the next thing I want to start doing.
Do you feel like spread thin? Like, do you feel like you're doing too much now, or do you feel like you can handle the amount of work that you're doing?
I can handle the amount of work that I'm doing because it's taken me 10 years to get to this point. You know what I mean? What I'm doing right now is not going to be sustainable to do that over time. You know what I mean? The tank's just going to get empty if you just keep doing it. So I want to be able to put a lot of stuff out there and then be able to take small breaks to go and read books, watch movies, listen to music that's not in our space. I have so many interests that aren't in this little like hip hop renaissance that I think, like how you said, how you have these things from outside of it, or like you're into comedy, I'm into art, and then we have this common thing. I think kind of like the strength of a good culture is sort of like keeping those things strong and then bringing some stuff from the outside into it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like how the Griselda guys did with wrestling, or what Wu-Tang did with kung fu movies or comic books, or all of these things kind of like create this bigger thing. And I want to get out and try to do some of that stuff. I haven't really consumed a lot of, like, I haven't watched a lot of movies in the last 6 months. I haven't read as much as I like to, or, I haven't put on music just to go out and be like the soundtrack to my life. A lot of it is based around, and the releases come so quick. Like you'll hear something and you think it's going to be like the thing you're listening to a year from now, and then it's gone in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I want to kind of like be able to sit and have some of this stuff resonate with me a little bit more, but for the time being, I'm taking on the work.
Yeah, it's been a weird year for that, because I feel that too, especially I'd say in the last month. Like this year, as you said, you knew people were going to be lazy, so you kicked it into overdrive, and I did that too. I started this, and we're a year later, and it's like I'm still kind of in overdrive. Like it keeps getting, I'm still, but as you said, the tank kind of runs out, and I feel, especially the last month, that like my tank is running low. Like I've been in overdrive for a year, and now I'm I'm getting to the point where it's like, I don't want to get out of bed, or like, I don't want to, like, I'm staying in bed later than I need to. And it's like,
Mhm.
I don't have that same force that I did 8 months ago because it's just been going because the world hasn't opened back up yet.
Yeah. And I actually listened to something about this a few months ago because they were talking about how people even behaved in response to COVID, like this time last year. And it was almost like people were so much on guard with what they were touching, where they were going, wearing masks, sanitizing their hands at every step of the way, that we were almost in like a fight or flight mode. And it's just not possible to stay in that mode. So that's why, like, in the months after that, it was like some of the people that were the most cautious just completely threw caution to the wind.
Mm-hmm.
And just didn't give a shit and were just out at places and didn't care. I'm still very cautious with this stuff. I really haven't been anywhere except for the supermarket. Um, but I think that it kind of relates to what you and I had just said. Like, you have the opportunity to build something out. But I've heard you say on some of your other episodes, a lot of the inspiration for your writing or what you do for your comedy comes from real life experience. And if we're not having that real life experience, then we're just making art about the art that we're watching. You know what I mean? We're not
Yeah.
pulling anything else into it.
Yeah, and you're also digging too deep. Not that you shouldn't dig deep in yourself, but sometimes when you can't find stuff around you, you kind of are like, all right, let's try to figure out more stuff. And it has to come organically, I feel. Sometimes that isn't beneficial. You said the routine, but sometimes the routine, you can't focus on, you get stuck in the routine sometimes, and I love it, but you have to find a balance of what that routine is over a week, not just a day, like.
Yeah, definitely. The routine that I try to do is really based primarily on like the first hour after I wake up. And then after that, I want to be able to get that done. Now it's like a double-edged sword that works really well, because usually if you follow a good routine in the first hour, you're probably going to have a pretty productive day and probably like a fairly enjoyable day considering the outside stuff that's going to go on. But it's also, if you wake up and you do whatever, you work out and you meditate and you read a little bit and do this stuff, and then after that hour, if you want to decide to completely flush the day down the toilet, at least you got that productive hour in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my biggest thing is I haven't been productive right when I wake up the past like month. That's where I've been lazy, and it's like, but that's where it's most important. Like,
Yeah.
getting out of bed right when you wake up and doing something productive is going to start your day off right, instead of being like, I'll just lay here for another half hour, look at my phone.
Yeah. It's like taking like the smallest baby steps. Like a lot of times, I'll wake up. I'll just tell you, like my routine's pretty quick. I wake up, I drink a bunch of water right away, and then I won't like work out, but I'll just like jump out of bed and knock out like 15-20 push-ups, just so that I've like done a movement in my head, and it's kind of like crossed that bridge from like being groggy to actually doing something.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's whatever. It's like, try to meditate before I drink any coffee in the morning. But outside of that, it's just trying to like do some things that I like. And there's a lot of structure to my day because I have a day job. So I try to do a lot before I start work. And then it's all based around that. I kind of like that. I'm kind of nervous for like, if it ever gets to a point where I don't have to have a day job, and what I'm going to do to fill those 8 hours. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot. Like, I think sometimes like it's almost like the pressure's on. So it kind of gives you like, you have to get so much done in like short blocks of time.
Squat was talking about that, how he like has a full time job, and and he lives in the middle of nowhere, and he just like goes to work and then paints all night and then goes to work, and that kind of keeps him going. But it's cool that you guys all support each other. That's actually, that must be an easier way, where it's not like what artist is gonna like beat the other one out. It's like cool that you have relationships with these guys and you all support each other.
Yeah, it's really cool. I not too many people knew of me, and once particularly Squat, Sep, a few others really showed a lot of love, and to get that nod from those two was, that really put a battery in my back, in terms of like, all right, now I kind of have a little bit of a cosign. I got to keep going. The other strength in that is that for the guys that are really supporting each other, we're all kind of serving the same purpose in a lot of ways, but I think our styles are much different from each other.
Yeah. Did you always have your style? You have a very, as I said when I saw the Son of a Cut, like when it's a PQ piece.
Yeah. Thank you. I didn't always have that style, but I'm sure if you went back and looked at like some of my stuff from even when I was like doing like graffiti and sketchbooks, there's probably like a little bit of the DNA of that in there. But I try to make it evolve because there's a lot of detail that I put into it, and
a crazy amount of detail.
Well, all right. So my approach to that is because before I was doing this type of art, I was doing, making beats. And a big part of making the beats is going out and digging for records. I basically want to create album artwork that somebody would buy the album based on the artwork. Because a lot of times if you're out digging for records and you don't know the musicians that are on the credits on the back of the album, which is what you would particularly like buy a record for, it's cool just to buy a record based on the cover and have no clue what it's going to sound like. So that's what I try to do. But also, this music is so like big inside my head. So like the stuff, like the stuff you come up on when you're like a teenager, you lived your life with that as the soundtrack. So it's so, it works so big in your head. And I try to like do that when I just picture it if the album that I'm doing the artwork for decides, or somebody decides that that's going to be their fly god or their album that they're going to, just like base their whole experience off of, I want them to have the opportunity to be like looking at that album cover and examining the details. And there's like little mini stories based on what's going on the album that I kind of put into that stuff, and just kind of do it in my way. So that's really why I put all that detail into it.
Well, that must be not hard for you to do album covers, but it's not just like, here's a piece of artwork for you. Like you're trying to create something for them too. Like it's not, I don't know. It's you like with having to listen to the projects and put little stories into it. Like that does seem like that's a process, a hard process.
It's a process, but it's fun. You know what I mean? Like if I wouldn't be able to do this kind of artwork for music that I didn't love. And I've been fortunate enough, I've been really fortunate enough to have, for all the people I've done the artwork for, I really like it. And some of it I, really, really love. Like the Soul Provider album cover that I did for Screw Tape that I told you about. I did the artwork for the album cover, like front and back, and then for every song on it. So like in my head, I'm not so delusional that I really think this, but I approached that like I was in a group with Screw Tape. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of
like
course.
like that was the only thing I listened to for like 2 weeks, and I just pulled everything out of it. I don't have the time to do that for everything, but I wish I did. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if
but you love it.
were
like
willing,
you're doing it because you love it.
Yeah. And if I had a price where I only had to do 2 album covers a month and I could walk around for 2 weeks just listening to that one thing, I would definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess I don't want to speak because this is a very different thing, but I do this podcast for self-serving purposes too, just because like I want to talk to the people that I have on. And I mentioned this on an earlier podcast, but you being like you're in a group with them. It's like, oh, I get Vino Lamano on and I love Vino. And of course I'm never going to make music, but it's like, oh, I just kind of got a feature from you know what I mean? It's like, oh, I'm making something with him. Like we build, and that's cool for me. Like I want, this podcast is self-serving too, where it's like, I'm creating this for me too. I'm doing this for my own love and my own passion for what this is.
Absolutely. Cause you're not asking like status quo questions. It is in a certain way a collaboration. There's some stuff that we've talked about that I haven't really spoken to other people about, just because you happen to ask. And I followed enough, and you and I have had some exchanges on like just different stuff that we like we kind of knew about the routines and different stuff like that. Also, sidebar, I'm actually very interested in the routines of stand-up comedians.
Oh yeah, we can go into that.
I think there's a reason why people that are musicians and comics kind of relate to each other. You know what I mean? Like Chappelle had that whole culture of artists that sort of surrounded him. In a way, he's sort of like the curator of that movement.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, because he had lightning in a bottle and had genuine interest in what those guys were doing. And he put those guys on a much bigger platform than they were. And I think it's a reason why people relate to each other, because like for comedy, you have to actually be good. Like I'll listen if there's a dope beat and it's featuring like a really good artist, I'll listen to songs by really shitty rappers all the time if they have a couple good features and it's on like, you know what I mean? Some good production. I feel like for comedy, you can't really mask that. So I kind of like the idea of seeing how like comics go up and have that like trial and error writing. Like I shared the Seinfeld thing with you. It's like a constant, like, you're writing and creating, throwing it out, editing. There's so much more to it than just making something and throwing it up there. There's guys that are really funny, but they may not be able to conquer their stage fright, or like there's all of that stuff that goes into it. So I love hearing like interviews and the viewpoints of like a lot of comics.
It's interesting, and I was just talking about this to a rapper friend of mine, but about like rap and comedy, I feel like is pretending to give the least amount of fucks possible while giving the most amount of fucks possible. Like pretending like you don't care at all, but really you're putting your time. Like when I go up on stage, I want it to be like, I'm coming up with that in the moment. I don't care if it's funny. I don't care because I'm just but really in my head, I've thought about it so much, and I run and say my bits out loud while I go for runs to try to like memorize it. And it's like rap. It's like you think that they're just like, oh, they went in the booth and spit that or whatever. But it's no, there's a lot of time and effort and other things that go into it. But I also want to, as you said, live a life. Because if I'm just doing jokes about jokes or jokes about like I want to live a crazy life to talk about, I want to. I think about how when old people die, it's cliche, but they're always like, oh, I always regret what I didn't do. And I always thought of that as like, oh, I should take that in now and just do as much as I can. And do as much as I can. So then I have a basis of life to talk about. Going back to Griselda, like they didn't get big until their late 30s. They lived full lives to then talk about. Which I know I'm younger than that, but I want to be able to live a full life to talk about. And that's like a big basis of it,
Yeah. And I think that's actually what you just said about those guys is sort of like the strength of why this little like rap renaissance, shouldn't call it little because it's getting a lot bigger by the day. But why it's so strong, because you have so much creativity of a lot of guys or, women or, whoever that I'll give you an example. On your interview with Jay Royale, he was saying that he is still executing on some ideas that he had when he was in high school, but he never fully formed those. And I think that speaks to a lot of the stuff I do. Like if I had these opportunities that I have now when I was 18 or 19, I would have blew them. You know what I mean? I would have done something to mess that up. Where a lot of these guys, like I'm 40 and I'm at like the midpoint of age of the people in this scene. And I think a big part of that is like these guys see that they can do it. It would be like in the 80s, if somebody just decided they were sick of like all, Motley Crue and all the hair metal, and people that were in their 30s just said, I'm just going to start a band and I'm going to make music that sounds like Led Zeppelin again. Mm-hmm. And that probably would have caught some wind, you know what I mean, at the time. And that's sort of what some of these guys are doing now, but it's like a modern spin, and they have these really good ideas, but they also have a little bit of more of the maturity to be on it,
Yeah. I'm so scared. One, thank you for listening. That means a lot that you can pull for that. That does mean a lot. But two, it's like, I worry about that. I'm younger, and like, I worry that what am I like? I don't want to screw it up. Like I interview a lot of these people who took their whole lives to learn, and it's like, am I going to, that's a part of this. It's like, what can I do to not screw it up? Because I want this to be big and I want to keep going, and I don't want it to be, but also I realize that life has a different path, and sometimes you don't realize what that is.
Yeah. And sometimes like those, the screw ups, like stumbling, it's a great way to like gain a little bit of perspective and come back from something. You know what I mean? Like you have these great artists that sometimes their best album happened after they caught some wind in their sail, and then they made that one really shitty album. And then they saw how
look at Boldy James. Mm-hmm. Boldy James, all of his albums on Mass Appeal, his first album with Alchemist, amazing. Then he goes to Mass Appeal, does all this pop shit for 10 years, and now he's finally making the music that he originally made. I do think about that a lot.
Yeah, I think that plays into it. And then also, the thing that I think is also different is where I'm saying that a lot of older guys are doing this stuff. You're also able to have much more fluid collaboration between guys that are in their 40s and guys that are in their early 20s as rappers. And it's not looked at as like an unnatural collaboration. You know what I mean? Like if you're 23?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's some guys that are in New York, I don't know how old they are. I'm assuming they're in their like mid 20s. Like I don't know if you know like Fast Life, Starker, YL. They just sound like they kind of like pull in from this, sonic palette of like the 90s, but you can tell that they're like younger guys that probably came up on both MF Doom and also Lil Wayne. And that's cool. And it sounds very natural in that it's not like they're making music for younger people, or, like they're making music for themselves and they happen to be younger people. And it's not like they're just from Brooklyn and sounding like they're from Atlanta. You know what I mean?
People don't like, people hated on Wes for working with Travis. Travis Scott was in the studio with Westside, and people online were really like mad at him almost. But it's like, I was a fan of Travis before he was well known, when he was like a devil worshiper and made this weird, really dark music, like really dark, experimental shit that wasn't pop. And it's like, no, he's not just some pop artist. Like, if Wes is working with them, they're going to be doing something great. Like, it's not going to be phony. These are real artists.
And I think also you have these,
saying that I don't like 327.
You have these moments where I think it's good for both the pop culture and the subculture for those little things to leak in a little bit. And sometimes people go, and we're in a trial and error phase of that. You know what I mean? I happen to like Benny's Burden of Proof album, but a lot of guys that have been like around since the beginning with Griselda and Benny didn't really like that. But I think
love
it's
that
actually,
album,
I think it's good for people to try out that type of stuff. You know what I mean? You see where those guys have kind of like poked their heads into the mainstream a little bit. West really hit it with Who Made the Sunshine for a little while. He was getting a lot of publicity on that stuff. And then you have, sometimes they may dip in, like it seems like Conway is really tapping back into the original fan base with the music that he's been putting out over the last couple of releases. Like all his stuff with Big Ghost, I think is phenomenal.
So good. So, and Ransom, and the feature of Ransom, and it's just all the, I'm wearing a Lil Uzi Vert shirt right now. I love all styles of rap. I just like the art form.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Hip hop is so big right now, or not right now. It's grown to be so big that if people are like making the music that's like true to them, it should sound different. You know what I mean? And even within, the underground independent rap scene right now, I think it's important for somebody that is coming up in Atlanta, if they want to make something that's influenced by all this Griselda stuff, or like some 90s stuff, or maybe they, are influenced by the stuff that the guys in Rochester or Toronto are doing, but they want to put their spin on it. What makes it shit is when everybody is just making Derringer beats. You know what I mean? Because then it's gonna burn that bulb out faster than it should. And that's why I think it's really cool that like what they're doing in Toronto, what they're doing in Rochester, what we're doing in Philly, what Jay Royale is doing in Baltimore, and what Ty Farris is doing in Detroit, all of them are different from each other, but they fit next to each other.
Totally.
You know what I mean? You can put them on a compilation, but I don't want to hear an entire subculture where everything just sounds like Griselda, because those guys definitely push this further. But I don't know. I want to hear just a lot of variety. And then it would be cool to hear like a Conway and Kendrick Lamar collaboration. You know what I mean? Like those things are great for the culture, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Conway has been doing that, and Benny's been doing that, just hopping on different beats, working with different artists. Like Conway was on Juicy J's new album, and they had a fantastic collaboration. You should listen to that, because I never thought.
I'll check it out.
I love like old 3-6. Like Memphis is one of my favorite rap cities, so it was really cool to see them collab. Not giving the big artists not giving like main Griselda. Who do you want to do covers for? Like, are there artists that you are like fiending to work with?
You mean like in the bigger scope of things, or still within this independent scene?
In the bigger scope of things too. Are there artists that you're like, that you want to work with or work,
I think that there's some. All right, so first of all, there's a lot that I want to work with. There's some that I'm such a fan of their current aesthetic that I wouldn't want to disrupt that at all. You know what I mean? Like I've done a little bit of stuff with Jay Royale, but I kind of like how those black and white photos work on his album.
Oh yeah.
So I would only want to do that as like a variant. I kind of like what he's doing there. DJ Muggs, very high on my
I'm
list.
excited for his project with Flea Lord.
Yeah, and shout out to Sep. He destroyed that cover. That's like one of my
That's an
favorite Sep
amazing.
pieces.
Yeah, he really.
So I would say Muggs. I would say also, Griselda guys, Rome Streaks. I would want to do something with him. Daniel Son, he'd be really big on my list. And I've worked already with a lot of people that are adjacent to him and part of his crew, but I think him and I would work well together. I want to do stuff with people that our styles would fit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because you do have a very unique style that doesn't work with certain things, but it is a different aesthetic than what some other rappers are going for.
Yeah, like the stuff, because I still work really closely with Screw Tape, and I think that in a lot of ways, there's like him, there's Future Wave, there's Asun Eastwood. I think these guys make music that in my head sort of sounds like what my artwork looks like at times. So it's a very, very easy collaboration.
And you just had one come out, or is it coming out with Chris Crack?
Oh, so that was with I did that through Chong Wizard.
Okay.
So Chong releases some variant covers and puts them on like the test presses.
Yeah.
And I did full artwork for his project or a beat tape that Obliv from Virginia put out, and he put it out through Chong Wizard Records. And I did the full artwork on that and all of the test press. I did everything on that. And afterwards, Chong and I have a pretty good working relationship now. So like a lot of times, even if somebody's putting out stuff with their original cover, because I think Chris Crack had maybe even put that album out already on like streaming services, but then when it gets the vinyl release, it's a little bit different. So sometimes people will reach out to me to do some variant covers,
that's an awesome thing. I know that they just released the variant cover for If It Bleeds It Can Kill with Gourmet Deluxe. Yeah, the variant, though, it's awesome because it's not just the album cover. It can be like art around it. It can kind of still grow,
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of stuff that I do that I like the original cover so much that I'm just trying to do something to complement that. And I can kind of acknowledge that my thing wouldn't have worked for the main, you know what I mean? Like there's some stuff that you're doing it for the sake of selling records. And then there's some other stuff that you do for the sake of acknowledging that this is like an actual art form. So I can do like my more abstract spin on that. And I really, really enjoy doing that.
Man, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate talking and your time. And it was really great, like meeting you and getting to know you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I got put onto the show when Squat was on it last month or the month before. And then I've been trying to check out as many episodes as I could.
I really appreciate that. And I hopefully when shit opens back up, I can meet you in person, and I'd love to, talk to you again.
Yeah.
You want to plug your stuff?
All my stuff is at my Instagram is at Pecue Design, Pecue Design, and then on PecueDesign.com.
Awesome. Thank you. Really, everyone check it out. Make sure to look at all his artwork, follow him, look at the prints, and thank you. You can subscribe on YouTube. Bye,
Okay,
everyone.
great. Thank you so much, Sam.